The flight attendant's fist came down hard, the crack echoing through the cabin. The boy clutched his face, tears streaming as he cried, "I only asked for water! Mom, my jaw hurts." The boy's voice was muffled, trembling. He cupped his face with both hands, his eyes wide with pain. His mother's heart dropped as she leaned toward him in the cramped row, her voice shaking. "What happened? Who did this to you?" But before she could finish, gasps erupted across the cabin. Passengers turned, stunned, some rising halfway from their seats. And there she stood, the flight attendant, her posture stiff, her expression cold, as if nothing unusual had happened. The boy's jaw hung at an unnatural angle. His sister's scream cut through the roar of the engines. Phones came out, passengers whispering, filming, their voices layering disbelief over fear. Just a few rows back, a man lowered his reading glasses and set aside his journal, his silver brows furrowed, his gaze sharp. He had seen violence before, though rarely in such an unexpected place. Federal Judge Richard Calloway didn't move yet, but he was watching, measuring every word, every reaction, the way only a judge could. The scene seemed frozen in time, the boy hunched in his seat, the family scrambling to comfort him, and the flight attendant retreating down the aisle as though her hands were clean. The hum of the engines drowned nothing out. Every passenger could feel it. Something irreversible had just happened. And yet, this wasn't where it began. The story of how a routine flight spiraled into horror didn't start with screams or shattered bone. It started quietly, with a look, with clipped words, with a tension that built like a storm long before the first lightning strike. To understand how this boy's jaw came to be broken, we have to go back. Back to when the flight felt like any other. Back to when innocence and arrogance shared the same cabin, unknowingly heading for collision. And it begins with the smallest sparks of tension, subtle, almost invisible, that would sooner erupt into an unthinkable act. "Keep your bag under the seat, not in the aisle." The flight attendant's voice cut sharp, her words landing like a reprimand rather than a reminder. A woman in row 12 pulled her bag back quickly, apologizing under her breath. The attendant didn't smile, didn't nod. She just moved on, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. It was a small thing, but sometimes it's the small things that reveal the truth. The boy watched quietly from his seat, his fingers twisting the cord of his headphones. His mother glanced at the attendant's retreating figure, her lips tightening, then turned back to her son with a soft smile. "Don't worry about it, baby. Just sit back. We'll be fine." But the tone of the cabin had already shifted. The hum of the engines filled the space, but beneath it, passengers exchanged glances. Some shrugged it off. People have bad days. But others felt it, that edge in her voice, that impatience aimed just a little too directly at certain faces. When she returned with the drink cart, the difference became clearer. "Coke or Sprite?" she asked a businessman in the aisle seat, her tone professional, almost friendly. He smiled back, took the soda, thanked her. She moved on smoothly. But when she reached the boy's mother, her tone cooled. "Do you have orange juice?" the mother asked. The attendant sighed, eyes flicking to the cart, then back. "We don't carry that this time of day," she said flatly. The mother nodded politely, choosing water instead, but the exchange left a sting, visible in her tightened jaw. The boy leaned closer to his mother, whispering, "Why is she mad at us?" His mother pressed a finger to her lips. "Shh. Just stay calm." Across the aisle, the federal judge lowered his journal again. His eyes flicked between the passengers and the attendant, catching patterns others might dismiss. He didn't write anything down. He didn't intervene. He simply noticed. Judges are trained to notice. The flight carried on. Overhead bins rattled during turbulence. Children giggled too loudly. Headphones leaked faint music into the air. normal distractions, everyday annoyances. Yet the attendant's responses sharpened the edges of the atmosphere. "Sir, your seatback needs to be upright," she snapped at one passenger, though the recline was barely visible. "Miss, I'm sorry, but could I get a blanket for my daughter?" another asked softly. The attendant pursed her lips, muttering, "I'll see what I can find," as if the request were an inconvenience rather than her job. Bit by bit, her demeanor carved the cabin into two halves, those who received polite service and those who received something colder. The boy's sister shifted in her seat, hugging her stuffed animal tightly. "Mom, I don't like her," she whispered. Her mother smoothed her hair. "It's okay. Just ignore it." But ignoring wasn't easy, not when every sigh, every clipped word, felt heavier than the last. The judge shifted again, crossing his arms now, his gaze steady. He had seen these divides before, at school board hearings, at employment trials, in civil rights cases where small gestures held enormous meaning. Bias rarely announced itself loudly. It crept in, quiet but undeniable, until finally it snapped. Passengers sensed it too. You could see it in the way they sat straighter when she walked past, in how their conversations softened when she lingered nearby. The boy, once fidgeting with his backpack, now sat perfectly still, his body shrinking toward the window, trying not to be noticed. For now, the flight remained calm. But the calm wasn't peaceful. It was tense, fragile, like glass stretched thin. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and it could all shatter. And as the plane cut through the night sky, that moment was drawing closer, far closer than anyone realized. Because soon, the quiet 10% cyan inside this cabin would ignite into an act no one could have imagined. "Excuse me, can I please just have some water?" The boy's voice was soft, almost apologetic. His finger hovered nervously over the call button as the cabin lights dimmed for the evening portion of the flight. His lips were dry, his throat parched. It was such a small request. But the moment those words left his mouth, everything changed. The attendant froze. She turned her head slowly, her expression hardening into something sharp. The cart wheels squeaked to a stop in the narrow aisle. Passengers glanced up, sensing the shift, though no one spoke. "Didn't I already tell you?" she snapped, her tone rising above the steady drone of the engines. "Beverage service isn't ready. You'll wait like everyone else." The boy shrank into his seat, startled by the sudden heat in her voice. His mother leaned forward, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "Ma'am, he's just a child. He only asked politely. If there's any way—" But the attendant cut her off. "I don't need parenting advice. Control your son before he disrupts the whole flight." Gasps rippled down the row. A man across the aisle muttered under his breath. He wasn't disruptive at all. But the attendant's glare silenced him before he could say more. The judge in row 16 looked up again, his eyes narrowing. He didn't speak, but his mind was already cataloguing every word, every detail, the way he would in court. The tension hung thick in the air. The boy's sister clutched her stuffed animal, whispering, "Why's she so mean?" Their mother whispered back, "Don't look at her, sweetheart. Just stay calm." But calm was no longer possible. Moments later, the turbulence jostled the cabin. The boy, already uneasy, tried to adjust his seatbelt. His elbow brushed against the cart as the attendant passed again. And that was the spark. "Snatch it!" she snapped, her voice booming louder than necessary. The boy startled, yanking his arm back. I'm sorry," he stammered. But sorry wasn't enough. The attendant leaned down, eyes narrowing into a glare that froze him in place. "You need to learn some respect." Her words weren't a correction. They were a threat. His mother stood halfway from her seat. "That's enough. He's just a child. You don't talk to him like that." The attendant straightened sharply, her hand gripping the cart so hard her knuckles whitened. "Sit down, ma'am, or I'll have security waiting at the gate." Passengers whispered now, some pulling out their phones. The unease from earlier had hardened into fear, into outrage. But still, no one fully understood how quickly this was about to spiral. The boy's lips trembled as he looked to his mother. "I didn't mean—" Before he could finish, the attendant leaned closer, her face tight with anger, and then her hand moved, too fast, too sudden. The sound was sickening. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin. The boy's head jerked back, his cry muffled, broken by shock. His hand shot to his face, his eyes wide, mouth opening but unable to form words. And then came the scream, high-pitched, raw, piercing through the fuselage like a siren. "My baby!" his mother cried, wrapping her arms around him. "His jaw! Oh my God!" The cabin erupted. Passengers jumped to their feet, shouting at the attendant, demanding answers. Some lunged forward, others yelled for the captain. The sister sobbed into her stuffed toy, her small body shaking uncontrollably. And through it all, the judge remained seated. His expression was grave, his jaw set. He had seen violence before, but never like this, never in a place where safety was supposed to be absolute. He leaned forward just slightly, his mind already shifting into the precision of testimony. Because this was no longer a misunderstanding. This was an assault. The atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted from uneasy to dangerous, from tension to chaos. Every passenger could feel it now. The fragile barrier between civility and violence had been shattered, and the flight wasn't even halfway to its destination. Next, chaos will consume the cabin. Cries, accusations, and the desperate scramble to respond as panic erupts in the skies. The sound came first. A sharp, sickening crack that sliced through the steady drone of the engines. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time itself had frozen inside the pressurized cabin. Then came the scream. The boy clutched his face, eyes wide with shock, tears streaming instantly as a muffled wail broke through his trembling lips. His small body folded in on itself, shaking uncontrollably, his hands pressed desperately against his jaw, as though trying to hold it together. Gasps exploded all around. "My God, she hit him!" a woman cried from row 12, her voice rising in disbelief. Phones flew into hands, screens lit up, capturing the chaos before it could be erased. The mother lunged forward, pulling her son into her arms, her voice cracking with anguish. "Baby, talk to me. What did she do to you?" She cupped his face, recoiling instantly at the swelling already forming along his jawline. His mouth barely opened, his cry coming out as a broken whimper. Across the aisle, a man shouted, "Call the captain! Somebody do something!" His words only fueled the chaos. Passengers stood, arguing, demanding answers, their voices clashing in a storm of outrage. And there she stood. The flight attendant, her face stone, her posture rigid. She didn't apologize. She didn't flinch. Instead, she doubled down, her voice sharp and commanding. "He was out of control. I was defending myself." The words landed like poison. Passengers erupted in fury. "He's a child," one yelled. Another woman screamed, "You broke his jaw." A man leaned into the aisle, phone aimed directly at her. "Say to—" "Hat again for the camera. Say it." The attendant's eyes darted to the phone, her mask of authority cracking for a fraction of a second before returning. She reached for the intercom, and then silence. Because a voice, low and steady, broke through the uproar. "Enough!" It wasn't a shout. It wasn't frantic, but it carried weight, slicing through the chaos like a gavel hitting wood. Judge Calloway lowered his reading glasses, his eyes fixed on the scene. He didn't reveal who he was, not yet, but the authority in his tone silenced the row nearest to him. Still, he didn't intervene fully. He observed, storing every word, every gesture. Judges know the value of silence, the way it draws truth out of people who believe no one is watching. Meanwhile, the boy writhed in pain. His mother waved frantically. "Help us! He needs ice! Something, please!" She looked around desperately, but no one from the crew moved to assist. Not yet. The other attendants lingered near the galley, eyes wide, frozen between loyalty and horror. Passengers began to choose sides. Some demanded the attendant be restrained, shouting for duct tape, for handcuffs. Others muttered anxiously, "What if she calls the police at the gate? What if they twist this?" The fear of authority loomed, even as the boy's cries grew weaker. The judge leaned back slightly, his mind racing. He knew exactly what this was. Disproportionate force, the abuse of power, and the attempted rewriting of reality. He had seen it in depositions, in witness stands, in countless courtrooms. But rarely had he seen it unfold so brazenly before his own eyes. The mother pressed her forehead to her son's, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Just breathe." His tears soaked into her blouse, his jaw already swelling grotesquely. The sister clung to her mother's arm, her stuffed animal crushed to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound of phones recording filled the air, the quiet click of cameras, the subtle rustle of passengers adjusting angles. Truth was being preserved, second by second. And yet, the attendant still tried to control the narrative. "This family is disrupting the safety of this flight," she announced loudly, as though speaking to a jury only she could see. "I will not tolerate aggression." A passenger shot up from row 10. "Aggression? He's 12 years old." Another voice echoed, "You hit him. We all saw it." The cabin buzzed with indignation, voices overlapping until the space felt like it might explode. But in the eye of that storm, Judge Calloway sat still, watching, listening, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Because he knew. Words spoken in anger often revealed more truth than words spoken in calm, and every lie, every exaggeration from her lips, would be weighed against the silent, undeniable evidence of the boy's pain. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The mother demanded medical help. The boy whimpered softly, drifting in and out of quiet moans. Passengers argued openly, some nearly coming to blows with the attendant. And through it all, the captain remained locked behind the cockpit door, relying on fragments of reports coming through the intercom. The plane cut through the night sky, but inside, it was no longer a flight. It was a trial in motion. Witnesses, testimony, evidence, all unfolding in real time. The federal judge said nothing, but in his silence lay a storm. His mind sharpened, cataloguing every word, every expression, every possible legal implication. He knew justice would not be denied, not with what he had seen. But for now, the cabin was left to chaos, and the boy, broken and trembling, bore the weight of silence. Because the violence was only the beginning. What came next would test not just the passengers, but the very system meant to protect them. "Somebody help him!" The mother's cry tore through the cabin like an alarm. Her son whimpered in her arms, his jaw already swelling, his sobs muffled by pain. The passenger, as closest to the family, scrambled, some reaching for tissues, others fumbling for their phones, desperate to do something. But the chaos was louder than reason. "He's just a kid!" a man shouted from 3 rows back, his voice trembling with rage. Across the aisle, a woman clutched her pearls, her face pale. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "How can this be happening here?" The flight attendant, the very cause of the uproar, stood rigid, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her face was set in stone, her eyes burning with indignation. Instead of remorse, she doubled down. "I told you all! This boy was out of control!" she barked, her voice rising to be heard over the uproar. "I acted to maintain order, for everyone's safety." The statement ignited the cabin like a spark in gasoline. "Safety!" a passenger roared. "You broke his jaw!" Phones rose higher into the air. Screens glowed, recording every word, every flicker of expression. There was no hiding now. The truth was being captured from every angle. The boy's sister clung to her mother's sleeve, wailing, "Make her go away, Mummy! Make her stop!" Her small voice cracked, only deepening the panic. Two attendants rushed forward from the back, their faces pale, their voices quivering as they attempted to calm the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We need calm. Please remain seated." But no one listened. The passengers were beyond quiet obedience now. One man stood halfway in the aisle, finger stabbing toward the attendant. "She's dangerous. Restrain her before she hurts someone else." The other attendant raised trembling hands. "Sir, we can't." "You can't? Then who's protecting us?" he fired back. The captain's voice crackled faintly through the intercom, trying to impose authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. Please remain calm in your seats. We are handling the situation." But the words fell flat. Because inside that cabin, order was gone. The mother's sobs, the boy's cries, the passengers' furious shouts, it all mingled into a storm. Arguments broke out between strangers. Some demanded the attendant be removed immediately. Others, frightened of escalation, begged everyone to sit down and wait until landing. And through it all, one man sat still. Judge Richard Calloway. From his seat near the middle of the cabin, he watched with piercing focus, his lips pressed into a line, his journal now closed on the tray table in front of him. He didn't rise, he didn't shout, but his eyes tracked every word, every gesture, every attempt to twist the narrative. He knew something vital. Timing mattered. If he revealed who he was too soon, chaos might erupt further. But if he waited, if he watched, he could ensure that when the truth was spoken, it carried undeniable weight. The boy moaned again, a sound that silenced even the angriest voices for a brief second. His mother pressed a damp cloth from another passenger against his jaw, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. You're strong. Just breathe through it." Her hands shook as she held him. The attendant shifted uncomfortably, sensing the weight of dozens of eyes drilling into her, yet she still tried to command the moment. "Record all you want," she sneered. "You don't know the full story." But the passengers did know. They had seen it. And the truth was spreading beyond that cabin. Every phone recording, every frantic text sent mid-air. The plane shuddered slightly in turbulence, causing even more screams. For a moment it felt like the chaos inside might tear the aircraft apart. "Sit down," one attendant pleaded. "No," came the roar in response. The lines were drawn. Passengers against crew, grief against denial, truth against lies. And the boy, his swollen face pressed against his mother's chest, was at the center of it all. The judge adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he made a mental note of the attendant's exact word. He knew how fragile justice could be, how easily facts could be twisted. But he also knew this. Too many people had witnessed what happened. Too many voices could testify. This truth would not be buried. Still the scene spiraled. Shouts overlapped. Passengers stood in the aisles, refusing to back down. Some argued furiously with the crew. Others demanded first aid. A few prayed quietly in their seats, whispering desperate words for the boy's healing. It was chaos. Pure chaos. And yet, in that chaos, something else was forming. A unity. A shared outrage. Strangers defending strangers. Passengers, once divided by silence, now united in protest. The flight was still in the air, but everyone knew this wouldn't end when the wheels hit the ground. The mother kissed her son's forehead, tears streaking her cheeks. "We'll get through this. I promise." and behind her, the judge sat forward, hands steepled, gaze unyielding. Because when this plane landed, silence would break. Justice would demand to be heard. Next, the descent begins, and the crew scrambles to contain the damage as the reality of what has happened can no longer be hidden. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. We are beginning our descent. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but strained, as though even he couldn't mask the weight of what had happened. The cabin was no longer shouting, no longer boiling with chaos. Instead, it was heavy with a chilling silence. A silence thickened by whispers, the quiet rustle of phones recording, and the muffled sobs of a mother rocking her injured child. The boy leaned against her chest, his face swollen, his jaw visibly shifted. Every few breaths a whimper escaped him, breaking the fragile quiet. His sister held his hand tightly, her stuffed animal pressed between them, as though it might shield him from the pain. Across the row, a woman bent forward, offering a small packet of napkins and an ice-filled cup she'd begged from the attendants. "Here, press this gently. It'll help with the swelling." The mother nodded gratefully, wrapping the makeshift ice pack in tissue before holding it to her son's cheek. He flinched, but she whispered, I know. It's cold. But it'll help, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer." Phones stayed raised, their tiny red lights blinking. Passengers whispered to one another. "They'll never get away with this." "Do you think the airline will cover it up?" "Not with this many cameras. Not tonight." The flight attendants, shaken and pale, moved stiffly through the aisle. Their voices were hushed now, pleading more than commanding. "Please, we're landing soon. Remain seated. Everyone, keep calm. Let's just get through this safely." But their words felt hollow. No one trusted them anymore. Not after what had happened. At row 16, Judge Calloway sat with his hands clasped, his eyes locked on the boy. His mind worked in silence, turning the chaos into evidence, each moment into testimony. He could see the bruising already darkening along the boy's jaw. He could hear the contradiction between the attendant's earlier words and the undeniable reality before them, and he could feel the weight of justice slowly coiling, ready to strike. Outside the windows, city lights began to twinkle beneath the clouds, growing brighter as the plane dipped lower. But inside, the atmosphere grew heavier still. The boy shifted weakly, whispering through clenched teeth. "It hurts, Mom." "I know, baby," she replied, kissing the crown of his head. "We're almost there. Just hold on." Her words were meant for him, but the whole cabin heard them. And in that moment, passengers found themselves united again, not in outrage, but in quiet grief. Their silence was no longer fear. It was focus. Resolve. Every camera stayed pointed. Every witness stayed ready. The attendant who had struck him lingered near the galley, her back to the passengers. She didn't speak now. She didn't dare. The authority she once wielded had dissolved into isolation. Even her fellow crew avoided her, their eyes averted, their loyalty fractured. As the plane tilted into its final descent, a passenger muttered, "The second those wheels hit the ground, this is going public." Another added, "The world will see what she did." The mother tightened her embrace, whispering, "They'll see you, baby. They'll hear you." And somewhere in the background, the judge's gaze hardened. Because he knew this wasn't just about a broken jaw. It was about truth. And truth had just been given dozens of voices. The wheels lowered with a heavy thud. The cabin jolted. Seatbelts tightened. And for a fleeting moment, the silence deepened. One collective breath held as the ground rushed closer. But silence never lasts. Not when injustice has been witnessed. Because once the plane lands, silence will give way to something far louder. Accountability. The wheels screeched against the runway, the sudden jolt forcing every passenger back into their seats.
The cabin shook. Oxygen masks rattled faintly above, and then the plane slowed, rolling toward the gate. But inside, it wasn't relief that filled the air. It was raw tension. The boy whimpered in his mother's arms, his swollen jaw pressed against her shoulder. Passengers leaned into the aisles, phones still raised, whispering their disbelief. And at the front, the flight attendant who had struck him stood stiff and silent, her face pale but defiant, as if trying to hold on to a crumbling mask of authority. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate." No one moved. No one trusted the voice anymore. And then, as the plane came to a halt, the cabin door opened. 2 airline supervisors stepped in, their eyes wide as they scanned the scene. Behind them, security officers lingered. They had been warned of a disturbance. But what they walked into was far more. A plane divided, a child broken, and dozens of witnesses ready to erupt. Passengers began shouting, "She assaulted him! Look at his face! Don't you dare protect her!" The mother clutched her son tighter, her voice breaking as she called out, "Somebody, please! He needs a doctor! Now!" The supervisors hesitated, caught between procedure and panic. Their eyes flicked nervously toward the flight attendant, who still clung to her uniform authority like a shield. And that was the moment he chose. From row 16, a man stood slowly. He wasn't frantic, he wasn't loud, but his presence commanded the space instantly. His navy blazer was wrinkled from the flight, his silver hair slightly tousled, but his eyes carried weight. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice low but cutting through every whisper. Heads turned. The passengers nearest him leaned back instinctively, sensing something shifting. "I have been silent long enough," he continued. He took a step into the aisle, standing tall, his voice calm, measured, but carrying a power that silenced even the most furious shouts. "I am Richard Calloway, Federal Judge, United States District Court." The words fell heavy, like a gavel striking wood. The cabin erupted in a new kind of gasp, not of panic, but of shock. A judge? Here? Witnessing everything? The phones that had been raised now trembled with excitement, every lens snapping to capture this moment. The airline supervisors froze, their faces draining of color. The attendant's eyes widened, her defiance faltering for the first time. Judge Calloway turned slowly, scanning the cabin. His voice remained steady. "I sat in silence because I wanted to see, to listen, to make certain. And what I saw here tonight, what every one of us saw, was not order. It was violence against a child." His words carried no theatrics. They didn't need to. They carried the authority of law, the finality of truth. The mother's sobs softened as she looked up at him, hope flickering in her tear-streaked eyes. The boy, weak and in pain, blinked at the man now standing in the aisle like a figure of justice. Passengers whispered in awe. "A federal judge?" He saw everything. "She's finished." Judge Calloway raised a hand, quieting the murmurs. "This family will not be silenced. Their pain will not be buried under reports or procedures. I will ensure this incident is documented in full, and that justice is pursued without delay." The attendants at the back of the plane exchanged nervous glances. The supervisors swallowed hard, nodding stiffly. The judge wasn't done. He turned to the security officers standing hesitantly near the door. "Your first priority is medical care for this boy. Now." His tone left no room for hesitation. The officers moved instantly, signaling for paramedics already waiting on the jet bridge. Within moments, medical staff boarded, rushing toward the boy. Passengers exhaled, some in relief, some in awe. Order hadn't returned, but justice had entered the room. The attendant who had caused it all remained frozen, her arms crossed tighter than ever, but her mask had cracked.
She glanced toward the judge, her mouth opening slightly, as if to defend herself. But the judge stopped her with a single sentence. "I suggest you remain silent. Everything you say now will follow you into the light." The cabin buzzed with whispers. Cameras captured every word, every reaction. The truth was undeniable, and now it had a voice powerful enough to carry it far beyond that plane. The boy was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, his mother holding his hand, whispering reassurance as tears streamed down her face. His sister trailed behind, clutching her stuffed animal, never letting go of her brother's arm. As they moved toward the door, the judge stepped aside respectfully, bowing his head slightly. Then he looked back at the passengers. "You all are witnesses. Do not let this story be twisted. Do not let the truth die here." The cabin, once fractured, now felt it united again, bound by the presence of a man who had turned silent observation into powerful action. And as the boy disappeared down the jet bridge, the judge's gaze hardened once more, because this was only the beginning. What followed would be more than outrage. It would be the weight of justice pressing down on those who thought they could hide behind uniforms and procedure. The boy lay in a hospital bed, his jaw wired shut, the beeping of monitors breaking the silence of the room. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes red from nights without rest. She whispered softly, though he could barely respond. But outside those walls, the story was no longer contained. It had broken loose, across headlines, news broadcasts, and social media feeds. Flight attendant assaults, black child midair. Federal judge among witnesses. The words lit up screens across the nation, and what began as a single act of violence in a cramped cabin now echoed across America. Cameras gathered outside the courthouse. News anchors leaned forward with urgency. "Tonight, we're following shocking allegations of assault on board a domestic flight, an incident witnessed by none other than federal judge Richard Calloway." The weight of his name changed everything. Inside a private room, investigators gathered. Airline lawyers, union representatives, federal officials, all sat around a long oak table. The atmosphere was thick, tense, the stakes undeniable. And at the head of it all sat Judge Calloway, calm but resolute. He spoke with precision, his words deliberate. "I watched the entire event unfold. The child was polite. He posed no threat. The escalation came solely from the attendant, and the strike was intentional. There was no justification." His voice carried the gravity of the courtroom, but his eyes betrayed something more. Disappointment. Anger held firmly under control. The room fell silent. His testimony wasn't just another account. It was the account, and they all knew it. One investigator cleared his throat. "Judge, with your statement, this case will go beyond internal review. It will enter federal inquiry." Calloway leaned back slightly, his tone steady. "Good. Because what I saw was not just misconduct. It was an abuse of power, and it cannot be hidden." The airline representatives exchanged nervous glances, whispering hurriedly. Their brand was already bleeding in public, stocks dipping, public outrage mounting. And now they faced the certainty that no quiet settlement could erase what had happened. Meanwhile, outside the walls of authority, the streets stirred. Activists marched, holding signs, "Protect black children." "Accountability at 30,000 feet." Voices chanted in unison, their cries echoing across city blocks. On talk shows, commentators dissected every angle. "This is about more than one flight," one said. "This is about how power is wielded against the vulnerable, how bias creeps into every corner of daily life, even the skies." Another added, "The presence of a federal judge ensures this can't be swept under the rug. His testimony makes it undeniable." The boy's story was no longer just his. It had become a symbol, a mirror reflecting systemic cracks that many tried to ignore. And still, Judge Calloway remained steady, speaking only when necessary, each word a stone dropped into the rippling waters of justice. When asked by a reporter outside the courthouse if he believed this was a case of racial bias, his answer was deliberate. "I don't deal in speculation. I deal in facts. And the fact is, a child was assaulted without cause. The fact is, every witness saw the same thing. If we cannot call that injustice, then the word has no meaning." The clip went viral overnight. His calm delivery contrasted with the raw fury of the public, giving shape and authority to the outrage. The airline scrambled to contain the fallout. Press releases were drafted. Words like investigation, review, and safety repeated endlessly, but they rang hollow against the chorus of voices demanding accountability. Inside union halls, attendants whispered nervously. Some defended their colleague. Others distanced themselves, insisting her actions did not represent them. The industry itself felt the tremors. And through it all, the boy's mother stood firm. At a vigil outside the hospital, she addressed the crowd with trembling strength. "My son's jaw may be broken, but his spirit is not. And thanks to every one of you here, and thanks to Judge Calloway for refusing to stay silent, I know justice will not be denied." Her words drew cheers, tears, and chants that carried into the night. Behind the scenes, prosecutors prepared their case. They had evidence, medical records, passenger testimony, hours of video footage. But the crown jewel was the judge's account, meticulous, unwavering, immune to dismissal. Because when a federal judge says, "I saw," the world listens. And so, the weight of justice pressed forward, not just on one woman in a uniform, but on an entire system forced into the spotlight. The boy's pain had sparked something bigger than one cabin's chaos. It had become a reckoning. And as public outrage swelled, the story prepared to leave the courtroom of law and enter the courtroom of public opinion, where millions would decide its legacy. The video hit the internet before the plane's wheels had cooled on the tarmac. Clips of the boy clutching his swollen jaw, the mother's desperate cries, the passengers shouting in disbelief, and then the calm, deliberate voice of Judge Calloway declaring what he had seen with his own eyes. It spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags surged to the top of social media. Justice in the skies. Hashtag protect our children. Hashtag we saw it, too. Strangers who had never met the boy began calling him a son, a brother, a symbol of every child who had ever been mistreated and silenced. News anchors leaned across their desks with grave expressions. "Tonight, the nation reacts to shocking footage from a domestic flight." Panelists debated not only the crime itself, but what it represented. Bias, power, and the fragility of safety for black families in spaces where protection should be guaranteed. Civil rights leaders rallied quickly. Press conferences filled with microphones pointed at shaking fists. "This is not an isolated incident," one activist declared. "This is a reflection of a system where authority can become a weapon. Marches filled city streets. Homemade signs bobbed above the crowd. Justice for him, justice for all. Power doesn't excuse violence." Chants carried across skylines, echoing the boy's pain until it could no longer be ignored. Meanwhile, the airline scrambled. Executives huddled behind closed doors, their faces drawn with panic. Stock prices slipped as outrage snowballed. Public statements promised investigation, accountability, healing. But to the public, they were just words. Too little. Too late. The flight attendant herself became a national pariah. Her name trended online, her photograph splashed across headlines. Neighbors gave interviews to reporters on her front lawn. "She always seemed strict," one said nervously, "but I never imagined this." Prosecutors moved quickly, bolstered by the judge's testimony. Legal proceedings loomed, and the weight of accountability finally pressed down on the woman who once commanded an aisle. And through it all, the family stood at the center. The mother, weary but unbroken, spoke softly outside the hospital where her son recovered. We didn't ask for this fight, but if our pain can bring change, then let this moment matter." Her words struck deep, carried across every channel, replayed again and again. For the public, the verdict was already delivered. This wasn't just about one child's broken jaw. It was about a nation's breaking point. About whether silence would be allowed to smother truth, or whether truth, seen by witnesses, spoken by a judge, amplified by millions, could finally bend the arc toward justice. And as the boy healed slowly, quietly, another story began. Not of violence, but of resilience. The final chapter was no longer about what was broken, but about what could not be broken. The boy sat quietly by the window, the sun pouring across his face. His jaw was still wired, every word a struggle, every bite of food measured and careful. But his eyes carried something unshaken. Strength. His mother brushed his hair gently, whispering, "You're healing, baby, day by day." His sister climbed beside him, clutching her stuffed animal, determined never to leave his side. Their family had been broken open by violence, but it had not been destroyed. Beyond the hospital walls, the world still roared. Lawsuits filed, hearings scheduled, headlines spinning. But here, in the quiet, the story was no longer about what had been taken. It was about what could not be taken. His spirit, his dignity. His voice, even in silence, spoke louder than any wound. And somewhere else, Judge Richard Calloway sat alone in his chambers, pen in hand, reflecting on what he had witnessed. He knew the law well, but that flight reminded him of something even deeper, that justice begins not in the courtroom, but in the courage to bear witness, to speak when silence is easier, to stand when others shrink away. His words echoed in his mind. Injustice thrives in silence, but when truth is seen, and when truth is spoken, justice has a chance to breathe. The boy's jaw would heal. The scars of that night would linger, but his story had already grown beyond him. It had become a reminder, to every parent, every passenger, every citizen, that silence protects the powerful and truth protects the vulnerable. And so, the chapter closed not with a broken child, but with an unbroken spirit. Because some wounds fade, but the courage to tell the truth can last forever.